Oh, hey everybody. Sorry I didn't see you there. Welcome to the Man Alone YouTube channel. We're going to talk solo RPGs today, but I was just a little bit frustrated because I've been trying to get a pebble out of this rock, and I just can't get it for whatever reason. Hold on, give me a second. Oh, finally. After only 2 hours, I got a pebble, which I need to make a fire pit, which with that I could then make a kiln. And one day from that, I'll be able to fashion a larger tool that I'll be able to break bigger rocks with, and then use those bigger rocks to make bigger hammers for yet even bigger rocks. And so is the fun of crafting. Crafting. It's in a lot of games, a lot of video games. It's in a lot of tabletop games as well, but there's something different going on. What is it? Why do we have such a hard time with crafting in tabletop games? Is there a better way to do it? Is there a system that has a better way to do it? What's missing? What's wrong? All this and more in today's episode. So to begin, we should specify that there are kind of two types of crafting. They're similar and they're called crafting, but there's a little bit of a difference. Kind of like how there's two types of cinnamon. You ever notice that? Like there's big red chewing gum cinnamon, and then there's like cinnamon toast crunch. That might be cinnamon sugar. I don't know. But there's the crafting, which is in almost any AAA game now, which involves like picking up some sort of shards or gems or unit of magical power and using that to repair or reforge or add attributes or magical powers to weapons or armor, maybe bringing it up in sale price, rarity, etc. And that is usually in games where crafting is not the main event, although it may be possible to craft, have a more expansive crafting capability in those games. And then there's more of crafting that we see in games like Minecraft or Terraria, or one of my favorite games of the last 5 years, Don't Starve. And I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Something about gathering materials, following blueprints, improving the settlement you have, or building your own items, or improving your stats through increasing your passive, item or resource development. It's really fun. And even though it isn't real, like I'm not actually harvesting any parsnips when I build my own garden, it makes me feel that sense of accomplishment by proxy, which is really what we're looking for in a video game, is to feed our lizard brain instincts without having to get off the couch, for better or worse, right? And so real life crafting is fun as well for a lot of people. You get to enjoy the thing you made, you get to learn a new skill, you get to make something that is worth more than the sum of its parts, and translating that into a digital space makes crafting all the same levels of fun, maybe not as much fulfillment, but enjoyment, without having to pick up a pickaxe or a sledgehammer. And if it can be translated from IRL to video games, is there something that gets lost in translation when we go from video games to tabletop? Well, I guess to begin, we sort of have to know what we're talking about here. And maybe if we trace the steps of crafting from real life to video games to tabletop, maybe somewhere along the lines we can figure out what's missing. Because I know some games, and we'll talk about one particularly that does it pretty well. I know other games that do it okay. Some games that they might be okay crafting rules, but nobody uses them. Or there's ones that the crafting is so complex that nobody uses them. And it's just a bit of a mystery that something that, in terms of Minecraft, has been a feature in one of the most successful games of the last decade, has not successfully ported itself into tabletop gaming. And so, first things first, when we talk about crafting, what are we actually talking about? Well, there is probably 3 stages of it. There is the exploration, right? And then there is the gathering, which can also be like harvesting. And then there would be the processing or assembly. And I'll write out that whole word. And obviously this could be also hunting, or this could be just, let's see, searching. I guess that's the same as exploring. But either way, you are retrieving a usually raw material. You are gathering it together, which means both like plucking it from the ground, or if it's living, you have to, make it not alive, and then processing it into something usable. This is, in a way, the story of like civilization, right? And so this is why literally hunting and gathering, that is a stage, an early stage of human development. So it is something in there that's very core to what humans do. So it's no surprise that we like to do it in games. And so in real life, just looking at the components of this, you do have searching, you do have the gathering and harvesting, and you do have the processing and assembly. And for each of these, there are some costs. And I wanted to list it, not exhaustively perhaps, but some of the major costs involved here. So I would say that the biggest one is effort, right? You have to put in sweat equity, and you have to withstand the grueling nature of what it does to your muscles and bones. And on a long enough timeline, I mean, I have a repetitive use injury right now, carpal tunnel. And so that is, and it's because I've been hunting and gathering emails at my job for years. And so you are also enduring mental stress. You are enduring emotional stress. And I would say there's also opportunity cost, right? You could have been doing something else, and so you're giving up. That would be your investment of time. And I suppose in the gathering, you're giving up like space, whether that's space in your backpack or your home or your car or your wagon or whatever. You are using tools and skills, and those are sort of retroactive costs, right? You had to buy or make the tools, and then skills represent a retroactive investment of time that you spent, opportunity costs that you spent learning how to do something or getting good at something, right? And then all of this is going to yield a product which is going to have some sort of utility to you. And that utility could be practical, right? You could very well craft an axe if you're a lumberjack, and that's going to help you cut down trees. It could have a utility to you in terms of money, right? Because it's sort of like the whole is worth more than the sum of its parts. That's why, like at craft fairs, That's why anyone sells anything, right? Because it's like, yes, it costs 3 cents to give you a Diet Coke at McDonald's, but after paying everybody and buying the machines and renting out the space and everything, that is, we were able to sell it at that price because it represents all of that went into it. And that's also why at a craft fair, you can buy a cute little darling little set of wooden earrings for $23. And people will say, what a ripoff. These only cost 40 cents to make. And it's like, well, yes, but there was stuff invested into that. There was a person who had to, first of all, rent that table space at the craft fair. There were people who had to learn how to wood etch or whatever, And so it could be an increase in sell back value. That's a terrible money sign. How do you do the other ones? How do you do the pound? Is it just like that? Okay, that one's easy. And then there's like no, that's the euro and the pound. Sorry, I just offended everyone. You could also have utility in the form of aesthetic, like it looks nice. It is customized. It is something that I want. It allows me to express myself. And I think in video games, a lot of these are the same, except they are abstracted, right? They're avatars of these things, other than time. However, even time is not running the same way in most games, right? Like, in Don't Starve, a day does not take 24 hours. In game, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes. And so the time investment is noticeable and significant there. The effort, again, IRL, I'm just like holding down B, but in the game, my player is expending effort. And so because of that, there might be some sort of loss happening, whether it's in like the loss of endurance points, or subjecting themselves to safety issues, or they run out of food, or they're further away from their base camp. And then space is definitely an issue in terms of inventory space. Tools, in most games like Don't Starve, you can only whack like a rock 100 or so times with a basic pitchfork pickaxe before it breaks. And then skills as well, building skill trees. So I'd say in an abstracted form, all of those things are being invested in video games. And I would say that all of these outcomes are also represented. You have some sort of utility when you build something. You can sell it back perhaps for more than the component parts. Perhaps it is aesthetic, or it's something that allows you to express yourself, especially in sort of open world games where you encounter other human players. It allows you to design your exterior, your stronghold, so to speak. I mean, that Fallout 76, which is that, if anyone still plays that, is that it's still a bad game? You go around and see some of these people's like mansions that they've built, and they're unbelievable. So is there any like definitive utility in that? Maybe like storage space and stuff, but for the most part, I think it's just kind of a flex, right? And so usually we are able to, if something is able to be replicated in a video game in an enjoyable way, then usually we can do a pretty good job of porting it again with tabletop gaming. For instance, combat, right? Like if I'm playing Dark Souls, maybe I won't have as fast of response in combat. Maybe there won't be the animations maybe I won't be able to enjoy like the manual dexterity piece of that. That I would say that dexterity is one thing that is usually not replicated in role-playing games. And in fact, as I'm saying that, I can't think of any use of dexterity that is actually fun. I know that there have been a couple attempts of that, of like dice flicking or Jenga towering, but in my opinion, that just feels like an extra step that doesn't need to happen because it's not really what we're going for here, right? The other thing is the math behind it, right? So in tabletop, for the most part, we have to do our own math unless you're using VTT. But even then, there has to be an initiation of those algorithms and a tracking and decisions made about them. For the most part, we are able to do this with a lot of things. We're able to port video game type exploration. And by the way, I'm not saying that all tabletop gaming is like a port of video gaming. I'm just saying if there's something we enjoy in real life and in video gaming, usually we can figure out an enjoyable way to bring it into tabletop. Exploration, combat, relationships, right? To some degree, maybe commerce, some good commerce systems that might be available. And even maybe like cooking or recipes or stuff like that. And that might be one of the closer things here. We could probably come up with a more exhaustive list than this, but for the most part, the way that we would abstract these things would be through the usual suspects, right? Dice rolls, dialogue. In group play, you'd have the GM rulings, and you might have playing cards. You could have time, like real world time. Somebody could set a timer. I usually only do this in my games when it's a little bit higher pressure and I don't want the players to sit there for 35 minutes deciding what to do next. And even then, they would get like 5 minutes for something in game that would be like 1 second. But yeah, we use these to and talk about it to recreate this. And yet something feels like it is missing in this process of crafting for tabletop. We search, hunt, or explore. Okay. That feels okay. Gathering and harvesting. That is a bit weird. And then processing. That is weirder than it has to be. This has always been a bit of a mystery to me too. Even games that are improvements on crafting, like Pathfinder 2nd edition, had a crafting mechanic, and even that was a bit weird. I can't remember it right now, but it was like you had to put up something in advance, and then you were able to like craft half of the object or something like that. No matter what, well, not no matter what, but a lot of the time there's an enormous amount of time that's required for crafting. And a lot of times I'm just thinking, what's the point? I can't tell you how many times I've sat during downtime in a game and I'm like, oh, maybe I should craft something. And then I look and I'm like, oh, cool, I have a bow staff right now. Quarter staff would be a little stronger than that. Let's see, a month to make a quarter staff. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like I'm not even an adventurer or like a warrior or a mage. And I think I can make a quarter staff in 8 minutes. Just let me know which broom you don't need anymore. And then also the searching exploration also has some issues in that the time that we are able to spend, say, in a video game searching and exploring is not exactly the same thing in tabletop. And so I'm doing all this to try and locate where in this sequence it kind of falls apart. And I want to talk about group play first, but we'll talk about solo play because I think solo play actually offers an opportunity to improve on this, because I think one of the biggest problems with this is, when do you look for items? And there is something similar to this in video games that does not usually happen in tabletop, that I think is just a matter of math. And that is like grinding for experience points. In video games, you're playing on your own. And I don't know if it still goes this way, but in my day, Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy VII, Dragon Warrior for the NES, Lufia, there was this part of gameplay where you just like went outside of the town and were just like going around and around and around until you had these like encounters. And then you just repeat this until you leveled up to whatever level you feel that you would be like dominant against, the competition. And this doesn't usually happen in especially group tabletop games, because it's not a good use of the GM's time, and it's not a respectful use of the other players' time if they're not interested in it as well. And it's also quite tedious, right? Like, we're trying to go beyond just like a video game, in that a video game does what it does within a set level of parameters of possibility, whereas the promise of a tabletop game is, man, anything can happen here. Anything, right? And so we want to develop a story, and we want things to make sense. And it doesn't necessarily make sense if you're like, okay, we have to go to this other town and stop this uprising, but first let's walk in a circle until we find 6 blobs. And then we all level. Who knows? Maybe some games it's more acceptable than others. And on top of that, the casualness of resource collection in video games, the fact that on a lot of games that have a resource system, you'll just sort of like get a bunch, right? Whether traveling and you're pressing A all the time and you're just picking up whatever's around, or after combat, you just get like, you open a treasure chest, you get 7 iron ingots, you beat someone in combat, you get 6 sheets of copper or something as part of the loot. And this same mechanic does not happen in tabletop. So that's one issue. Additionally, the sort of storage of these, it's difficult to manage the verisimilitude of the storage that is needed for most crafting on the scale of video games within tabletop, right? Because if you're playing a game, say, an average starting encumbrance for most games is what? 8 slots, 8 items. And so it's like you have a sword, a shield, a tunic, a hat, a helmet, some gauntlets, 2 potions, some herbs, and 480 chopped logs of lumber. So that's a bit strange as well. But then if we consider like what it would look like to have to carry 1 piece of lumber back, and it's like, very good, you need 400 more of these. And I'm not even being sort of out of pocket with the scale of this here. This is one of the reasons why crafting is very often an opt-in thing, and also why it's not used as much is because the mechanics for the numbers for how much of that stuff is needed, it just seems like not a good use of time compared to buying the thing or hoping to find the thing or getting it off of an enemy or something like that. Do I really want to, during an adventure, stop and find 600 pieces of wood? I don't know if I do. Obviously, it could be a little bit augmented with group play. Obviously, the GM could create something that would make finding that sort of an objective in and of itself. But there's already a lot of stuff to be managing, right? And so to add this into it maybe doesn't seem like the right choice. For those of you who are solo players watching this, you probably recognize, and I hope you recognize right now, that I feel like there are some opportunities opening here for solo gaming. And it can be a significant deviation from the format here. I think sometimes we get programmed into what has to be included into a game because the rules of game development are built around having a GM and 4 or 5 players. And so when we port that gaming experience over to solo play, we say, oh, well, it has to have the same sort of components to it. But this is an example of something that really wouldn't be tolerable in group play, but I think would be very enjoyable in solo play, is this resource gathering and crafting. And this is one of the games I'm working on right now, is centers on this mechanic. And it's been quite interesting to see a lot of the assumptions that I myself have and that I have to sort of disenthrall myself with in order to figure out mechanics that work, because we are, it is very obvious that the hegemony of role-playing gameplay is for group play. And I don't imagine that would ever change. I actually hope it wouldn't. I think that it is, if everyone was playing solo, I think we would be missing something unique and special about this hobby, or at least sometimes solo playing. So it would be easier to buy or find the object. I think in that we find one of the core problems of abstraction here. And one of the things that makes it so much less satisfying in tabletop than it is in video games, or in real life, of course. Okay, so if in real life I broke apart a stone, I'm actually going to get this stone, right? In a video game, I am going to get something that tricks my mind into believing that I have a stone, right? Whether that is a picture of it, whether that is the word, whether that is the visual representation of my player swinging a hammer at a stone and it breaking apart and little sparkles coming out, etc. But in tabletop, even if we use miniatures, we are employing, for most things in the game, theater of the mind. For most things, is theater of the mind. And so if I tell you, for instance, I think this is an example of theater of the mind that we take for granted. If I told you that you have 197 gold pieces, okay, you don't think of that number. Like, if I told you that I was going to give you $197, you would have the experience of recognizing that $197. You would see the bills that are required for that. Now, we could say credit cards and stuff like that is maybe a little bit different. And this actually probably proves the point, because people have so much trouble managing their credit accounts because of this exact reason. However, if you're getting 197 gold in a role-playing game, tabletop, you're not thinking of it. You're not, like, your brain, unless you have some sort of synesthesia, your brain is not picturing like 197 coins. Your brain makes no effort to picture like a bag filled with 197 coins. There's no part of you that says, oh, I wonder what these coins look like, right? In this bag here. What are the coins? No, you have quantity, X equals or G equals 197, right? Crafting feels different because there's some sort of tactile variable object, and there's so many different kinds that there is a novelty attached to it, right? There's stone, there's gas, there's oil, there's turkey gizzards, there's bones, there's like witches' moles, there's pine cones, there's, all sorts of different things that have these real world cognates that are represented in some way in play, and the gathering of them is represented in some way, right? Like you can't go into a desert and get palm fronds, okay? Now, when we do tabletop game and we are thinking about this in the theater of our mind, really, if I gave you 7 pieces of lumber, for all intents and purposes, this could represent that 7L, right? And then if I said, and also you have 3 sheets of tin and you have 10 pine cones, okay? And the problem that this itself isn't the problem, but the problem that this reveals, what I think is at the heart of this issue, is that when you look at it like this, you start to realize that crafting is a front. Crafting is a front, like a jewelry store that doesn't sell jewelry, right? It's a front, it's a cover. What crafting is another type of currency. It's money, right? Stripped of its real world cognate, the fact that there are no stones, there are no hammers, it's just trading quantity X for object Y. And it is that in video games too, but there's a sufficient level of obscurance, of mystification that takes place such that your mind is satisfied that it is not currency. But in tabletop gaming, there's not enough steps of abstraction that allow you to suspend your disbelief. So eventually, even if you don't call it that, it starts to feel like a currency. And given the fact that if I took this lumber, tin, and pine cone, and I don't know, I made some sort of like mini slingshot, and that costs me 7, 10, 20 resources, all of which are found in different places and have different places that you can find them, and different means of harvesting. And then I look in a store and the slingshot costs 30G. I'm like, well, why am I going to go and look for all of this when I can just spend 30G, 30 gold? And it's because the crafting materials are too abstracted. They're just quantities. They're bins, right? Now, it's not like I've discovered something scandalous and revolutionary here. The same thing could be said of experience points. Experience points are also a currency. And really, all of these things are just different levels of abstraction that allow you to, in some way, they are summaries of your effort, your success, your ingenuity, your craft, your dedication, your guile, etc. They are basically this abstraction of that, this singular point of condensed progress. And interestingly, some games, I believe ICRPG does this, they just do away with one of the two. And they'll just say, well, you level up with gold, or you buy stuff with experience points. Because when you are having to calculate these things and manage these things yourself, you see less and less reason to separate them out, simply because they might as well be the same thing. Now, obviously, there is usually a division in games, speaking broadly. Usually, gold is going to give you objects, right? It's going to give you swords. It's going to give you gauntlets. It's going to give you a new staff. Maybe it can give you like a scroll to get new magic. Maybe it can get you like a super heart that increases your hit points permanently. Experience points usually is going to give you increased skill points that, some games it goes linearly. Other games you can sort of spend it along a skill tree. It is going to give you higher max HP, MP. It's going to give you higher access to abilities, and potentially it can give you higher access to geographical parts of the game. And so these are both currencies, but they represent like two trees of development. Very often, the yield of crafting will occupy the same tree as gold. You will be able to craft objects, resources, items, etc. And so it can be an alternative shop. And depending on the game and what is required to craft, it is a shop that can be used in different locations. There might not be a shop in the bottom of a dungeon, but you can craft something. It also might provide some interesting opportunities in terms of saving inventory space by combining things. It might allow you to access higher levels of weapons, right? Magic weapons, enchanted, master crafted weapons. And so in that case, it would be a system that, while not required, a lot of players on the upper levels are going to want to interface with. But again, the problem is that it is not sufficiently distinguished from gold. And with the loss of visual, auditory representations of it in game, perhaps even tactile, there is the loss of fidelity. There's a loss of fidelity for the player to believe that the resources they gather are any better than cheaper gold. And usually they are, because usually 5 wood will net you 1 piece of silver. And it's like, well, I wish I would have just gotten 5 pieces of silver. Additionally, many games make you use inventory space for crafting materials, but not for gold. And so there is no reason to not preference gold above crafting unless crafting is required. And if crafting is required, that does turn off some section of the player base, the section of the player base that is no longer watching this video because they're not interested in crafting. It means nothing to them. And so how is it that you can restore the sensory, experimental, experiential fidelity to crafting so that it feels more valuable than just a shop by different means? Furthermore, how can you manage resource collection in a way that doesn't feel overly burdensome to the player themselves, to the other players at the table, to the GM, right? The GM's not going to want to be like, okay, next, roll again. Okay, how boring would it be if I said, okay, you got to roll a 20 to get this rock. Okay. Right. Oh, actually, I got a third. Nice. I got the rock. And to just redo that, because you could say, oh, okay, well, just roll once. And if you roll over this skill roll, then you get part of the rock. But that doesn't feel fair, right? It's like I bring a pickaxe to a rock and I roll once and I don't get anything, or I succeed and I get one, or I fail and then, my ability to get any more for the day are gone. If it doesn't follow some sort of system of ordered obtainment and depletion that utilizes risk, there should be some risk involved. Am I risking, again, effort, tools, skills, time, etc.? Because if I'm risking those things, I want to make sure that I'm getting some sort of utility out of that. And so there has to be utility in the outcome. There has to be some sort of good feeling on the gathering part. And the crafting has to feel like something that is both open-ended and has a template to it, right? I would say that that is 2B in terms of things that make crafting difficult in games, is that, you can have an exhaustive list of everything that can be crafted, which is interesting. On the other hand, you can have no limits on what is crafted. You could say anything could be crafted. And then there has to constantly be this decision by the GM of like what materials are required and how much time is required and how do we represent that time, etc. So let's go into an example of something that I think does a pretty good job at this. All right, so in terms of games that do it well, Forbidden Lands by Free League has a pretty darn good system, especially in comparison to the competition. I know there are some other ones. I've heard Fabula Ultima has a good one. I heard somebody tell me Ars Magica has one. Exalted 3E I've seen. I don't have as much experience with those, or they are not quite the type of crafting that I'm talking about. They're more of the first category, which would be sort of like weapon upgrades and stuff, which is crafting. I don't mean to say that that's not crafting. It's just not quite the brand of crafting to which I'm referring. It's actually not in the GM guide. It is in the player's guide. And if you've been watching my channel in the last few weeks, you'll know that I have been doing some solo play sessions of Forbidden Lands. And in case you missed this video from 3 weeks ago, the part of the title there of me having an amazing idea is me saying that I wanted to create a sort of collaborative stronghold for solo players, which the more that I've thought about resource management and crafting, the more and more I think that this is not only a great idea, but dare I say, something that could become a sort of solo playing innovation, a type of solo playing in parallel, where you can collaborate with other people on a stronghold mechanic, but then you can go off and do solo play on your own. And I'm going to talk about why I think this works excellently, and also a sort of out-of-game solo mechanic for group play. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So you have this stronghold, and the stronghold is a headquarters. You could have more than one, but I love stuff like this. I love it, not as much in group play, but definitely in solo play, because having something that you can continually build that is not only for like aesthetics or narrative, but it has mechanical effects to it, I think that that solves a big question of solo play nihilism mind games, right? Which is that part in solo play where you're sitting by yourself and you set your character up and you're ready to start, and then all of a sudden you roll dice and there is this demonic thought in the back of your head I literally think it's like a demon, like Paimon or something, and they say, "Why are you doing this? Why don't you just well, look at you could hear the clock ticking. Listen, tick, 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 right?" And you're like, "Yeah, why am I doing this? I'll just go do something else, right?" And it's because you don't have enough recursive loops of satisfaction in your play. And the stronghold is something that gives you a lot of joy without having to make big finds. So another game that does this pretty well, although a little bit differently, is Mutant Year Zero. And you have the arc. Now, you don't build the arc, at least in early game, you don't. I suppose you could later, but the arc has voting, like people have to vote on different projects. Everybody contributes to the project using their skills. And when you build new things in the arc, it improves the arc, but it also improves the players. It allows them more safety, more materials, etc. And the stronghold works the same way in this. Additionally, you could have attacks on the stronghold. You can hire people to work the stronghold. You can put in guard towers, inns, libraries. Check out that episode 1 video in the Forbidden Lands playthrough if you're more interested in this. But you can see right here, the requirement is 200 stone and 40 wood, and it requires that tool and that time. And then it tells you the effect. So the effect of the bakery is that if it's staffed, you get up to 12 units of flour that can be converted into food. And resource management in Forbidden Lands is very important. And so these all are laid out. They have definitive costs to them in terms of raw materials. Most of them here are iron, stone, or wood. And in the base game, that's pretty much it. So even though it only has those 3, I think that it is better at doing what it's trying to do than games that have 150 different resources. Because again, think about what we said about that abstraction thing. When it comes down to it, it is fundamentally a currency. It is a placeholder variable. And so naming that resource is technically flavor, right? It is flavor that might represent its rarity, its difficulty for extraction, its difficulty for how much time and effort it requires to work it. And so even in games that have a lot of resources, a lot of them, especially in tabletop, have to be narrowed down to certain categories of resources. And this is the idea that I have, because I have been working on an idea for this that I'll talk about at the end, because it's a little half-baked right now. I could really use a bakery. Little joke for everyone. And so, there is a lot of opportunity here, and then also to have this staff of hirelings, and then on top of that, you have this tie-in with the game that it can improve your resources and your capabilities, and then you want to defend the stronghold more, because crafting that is too far removed from the game becomes very optional, and it becomes something that players only want to do who are into that type of stuff. So one of the most amazing things to me is the level of video games that are currently free. Like, there was just this Marvel game that came out, Rivals, I think, and it's like a Overwatch, but with Marvel characters. I have no interest in it anymore, because Marvel used to produce happy in me, and now it just produces a sad in me, and so I have no excitement over it anymore. But I just like looking at the trailer for this game. It's outstanding. It's incredible. And it's free. And like Fortnite, they're relying on people purchasing in-game stuff, which to me is bananas. And the reason it's bananas is not because saying, why would anybody purchase fake things? I'm not saying that. I actually have a phone game. I play Warhammer 40K Tacticus. that I have bought, like, I've paid $5 real for like gemstone in that game. So I get that. What I don't get is that the purchases in these games have no tactical or strategic advantage. Like in Fortnite, you pay $20 to get a teddy bear backpack. And so I think that that is a very, very strong dividing line, but maybe generationally, maybe just like personality types. But I bring that up not to decry that type of thing, but only to say if the stronghold in Forbidden Lands only served to create a mental picture of my headquarters, I'd have no interest in it. I'd be like, okay, whatever. Like, I got a new carpet. I don't care, right? And so the fact that it is tied into the gameplay loop, that it can be tactically useful, but it also has that aesthetic piece to it where you can sort of do pimp my ride, but pimp my stronghold. I think it's great. Book of Beasts, I'm not certain if Book of Beasts does anything to really improve on this mechanic. In the solo rules, let's see if there was anything added. Oh, there was a mention, playing solo with others. Yes. There's a mention of that's at the end of the advanced expansion. So this is by Matt K. This is on Drive-Thru, excellent resource. And while there's nothing necessarily, there's a little bit about hirelings, but what it does say at the end, and I actually can't believe it took me this long, is it does mention these resources here of castles and strongholds and reforge power. And both of these are unbelievable supplements that I can't believe it took me so long to find. So this castles and strongholds, also available on Drive-Thru, really cheap, totally worth the money. And this one has a total excellent build out of different locations, generating castles, who's inside the castle, different encounters in there. But then in terms of strongholds, it has build and repair costs. This is pretty much if you're like taking over a castle and want to make it your stronghold. And then it also has these like availability of different natural resources. It expands the natural resources out. And it also has what I think is a really clever system of determining availability of a resource. I might do it a little bit differently, but again, I'll talk about that at the end. But I think this is a good go of it, because remember I was talking about like you have a rock and you have a pickaxe and you're like, okay, I want to bang the rock. And it's like, all right, well, your pickaxe is a basic pickaxe, so that's +1. And then your skill as a mining skill is 2. And so go ahead and roll a 2d6, and you have to have a +9 or higher to extract a resource. And you roll, and you don't get it. And then it's like, can I roll again? Okay, well, that uses up time. Okay, but earlier I had like a 2-hour conversation at the inn, and I didn't have to like spend any time for that. So why do I have to spend time on this, etc.? None of those things come into play here, because you're going to roll D66, and then based on the outcome of the D66, that will tell you how much is available in that area, and you would roll then that amount of dice to see how much comes up. And this, I think, is very easy to modify, but the real treasure here is listing out these different areas, because that is one thing that is like very strange that it's missing. It's not strange, actually. It's yet another thing that GMs just kind of figure out. And like I said, I think that's a good thing, but playing as a soloist, it really exposes these sorts of gaps in gameplay instructions, because you are the GM, and so you could hand wave that, but you kind of feel resistant to do that when you know that that sort of hand waving can lead to you having an unfair or non-true challenge of an experience, right? If I walked into a mine and I said, how much gold is here? You know what? I'll say that there's 5,000 tons of gold here. I mean, obviously that's absurd, but even if I were to say, oh yeah, there's three units of gold here, I'd say, oh, is that too much? Is that too little? And so to have some ability to do that and then different levels for things that are more rare, I think is great. And this raw materials in the GM guide, in the player's guide, there's really no instruction on it. And there's no instruction on weight. I found something in Free League Forum that says that like one resource is one item. And I was like, what? Because if we look back here at some of these things here, the shrine costs 80 wood. The tannery, 100 wood. The vault, 200 stone, 100 wood, 10 iron. And I need a sledgehammer, a pickaxe, a saw, and a hammer. So I have to carry all that? And where do I get it? Is it given as like drops in combat? Do I get it while I'm walking about? Is that something that we do as part of the journey mechanics? Because I need a lookout and I need a guide and I need someone to forage and all this stuff. And so having some sort of mechanics to determine like, okay, I'm looking to go craft. Are we ever going to get that thing that we get in a video game? No, we're never going to get like the feeling of hitting a stone until it booms open and a bunch of pebbles come out. But we don't get a lot of that stuff, and we're not looking for a lot of that stuff, right? Like, I'm under no illusion that when I'm playing a game that has firearms, that's tabletop game, that it's going to feel like Doom Eternal. It's just not, right? There's not going to be that sort of explosive kinetic feedback. It's a different kind of experience. But the trick is that resource accrual has to be abstracted in a way that is both fair and not tedious. And so I think that at the very least, the instructions in this Castles and Strongholds provides a template for that. How much is available? Great. Then I can use my skill checks to try and locate it, to try and extract it, whatever I want to do there. I can do that. And also you can see in the second table here, there's this work column. This shows how many people can work at the same time in that. And for instance, in a quarry, you could have 12 people. And with the hireling mechanic in Forbidden Lands, you could literally set up like a work site to do this. And I've read a lot of people who have successfully incorporated these dynamics into their Forbidden Lands gameplay. I've also talked to other people who ignore it completely, or they homebrew it into something completely different, or they create a salary system or whatever. So whatever works is what works for that group, of course. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, and this actually just completely blew me away. So when I bought this, it had like a recommended cost, and I threw a couple dollars at them. It's hard when you're making the videos, you're downloading a lot of stuff all the time. And then I actually went back and gave more money because I was like, this is unbelievable. So this Reforged Power is Johan Ronlund's guide. And this Game Master's booklet is 131 pages. Okay. But there's also a player's booklet, and the player's booklet is 178 pages. And if you look at this looks beat for beat. I'm sure that Free League released a template or whatever. This this dude like made a second like Forbidden Lands core book. And in every section here, this is like these different, like, why would you use this? You know, it says, well, you would use this mechanic if you really want it. Let me try to find an example of this. So we'll actually go to the Strongholds one. Where is this here? Strongholds. All right, so why use this module? Stronghold events are one of the more poorly implemented tables in the core book. Just starting as old to reputation, you'll likely be more than hit the end of the table. Yeah, so you have these stronghold events that they are modified by your age and reputation. Well, if you're old and you start your stronghold anytime but in the beginning of the game, you have all these early table events you're just never going to have. So it adds all these different events. It does this thing where you can set up research and invest in that, and making improved locks, a mage guild, leatherworking, a shipyard, water pump, stadium, dedicated temple ideas because of the different gods. So Worm, Raven, Korax. And then adds like even more playable kin. So this just absolutely blew me away, because this is exactly the type of, like, this is what you do with homebrew, right? Because it always feels a bit dismissive, right? When you're on Reddit or something and you see someone say, hey, how do I do this? And they're like, just homebrew it. It's like, well, okay, right. Let me go get my homebrew kit. Or if somebody, it's not even that, actually. It's when somebody's like, I just really don't like this mechanic. And someone goes, well, that's the beauty of tabletop role playing. You just homebrew it. It's like, it's okay. You can homebrew everything. I can literally play D&D and homebrew it, that instead of playing with 2 dice, you just throw 2 old onions at the wall. But we all share in this sort of collaborative endeavor to play by the rules as best that we can. And so we know we can homebrew it, but sometimes we scratch our head and say, why did they do it that way? Okay. So, so there are new modules. Oh, right. I think it's on the page. Right. So we have these new resources: milk, cured food, honey, wax, salt, oil, and new hirelings to work these different things. And then we also have these new construction materials. Now, still missing, I'm pretty sure, is the method by which these are collected. It could be combined with the resource availability from the castles and strongholds. And just see who made this, just to give props. Pablo Filero. So we could use the resource availabilities here, but there still seems to be a gap here in determining what is where, right? And I'm not certain that there's any way to fix that in a way that doesn't become overly tedious if your game has open-ended crafting, because you don't want to say, oh, well, there are only these resources in this area, only these resources in this area, because depending on where you are in the map and a person wants to make something, they might not be able to trek across the entire, I was about to say Misty Vale, well, I guess Forbidden Lands to get that. And there is like these rules on resource exploitation here. And I like that it takes that into account, and the fact that you can recover them. But I think this line right here, if you can, I don't know why I can't zoom. Yeah, on the bottom here. What would happen if the hexagon had a juicy deposit of silver, but no one had yet discovered it, starting roll after roll of exploration would be foolish. Agreed. It is better for the GM to figure out how to get the knowledge to the characters. There may be a legend that talks about it, or a worker stumbles upon the source of the resource by chance. Work on the most interesting opportunity that comes to mind. Okay. So now, what does this all mean for solo play? Well, let me say, as a bridge between group and solo play, that even though this idea is somewhat strangely not supported by GMs, there's a well, I don't want to call anyone out, but there's a blog I once followed that was said, you can't do any of this stuff out of game because you don't know if your players are honest dice rollers. And I have never heard anything so absurd in my life. What? Like, okay, if my players aren't honest dice rollers, then that affects their game. If that's how they want to play, if the other players feel that same way, they can go ahead and call that person out. But I have, and this is surprisingly common. I've just not even imagined having suspicions about my players, whether or not their dice rolls are legit. And I guess that's something about online play. But the idea is that there has to be some sort of cost for the time it takes to discover or harvest resources. And if that's the case, then maybe this could be limited to a certain amount per actual real world day. But I think that this could be a great thing to allow players to do between sessions, is go and look for resources. I mean, depending on where you are, if you're like locked in the middle of combat when your session ends, but if you're at your an encampment or a village, especially when I was younger and I was between sessions, I just wanted to do something. I wanted to sharpen a sword. I wanted to do practice. I wanted to do anything. As I mentioned before, one of the best systems for dealing with things outside of the game, as well as for people who miss a session, is Pendragon. And while Pendragon doesn't have crafting, Pendragon does have these solo events that are able to be rolled up by players outside of the game, or at the start of a session if they missed the previous session. Now, this one is Book of Solos, which is community made. But if you've watched any of my Pendragon videos, there is something called the Book of Sires, which is one of the coolest things ever made. And it basically, at the start of character creation, rather than just saying, here are your attributes, here are whatever. I mean, you do that, but you also roll up a timeline of events for your grandfather and your father, so that you come into the game with different passions, prejudices, histories, bad blood, honor, shame, maybe if any shame's been brought to your family, etc. And it's just these narrative tables that you roll for results on. And this is, these solos here are definitely going to play an integral part in my solo Pendragon campaign. But they basically just summarize a period of time in which a person was away in very general terms. And I think it would be awesome to give players who are so motivated the chance to go and harvest some resources. Honestly, I think it is something where form follows function, because you could say, oh, well, that's not fair. Like, some players are going to do that and some aren't. It's like, yes, but even in a video game, some people are going to spend 12 hours grinding their character's XP, and some aren't. Some people are going to look everywhere for the materials to craft a master crafted glaive, and some aren't. They're just going to buy it when they get a chance. I think that this would fit perfectly for that, and especially in Forbidden Lands when you have a stronghold. And yet another reason why I think this like collaborative solo stronghold has such promise, because you do it on your own time. The results can easily feed in. It can happen asynchronously, and everybody benefits from it. Okay. From a solo standpoint, I think one of the things that is hardest to figure out is how to change the tink 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 with a hammer into a dice roll. Because in a video game, you are sacrificing your own time and to some extent your own boredom on harvesting those resources in the hope that it will pay off later. Okay. And we won't even get into like gaming now with like in-game purchases and downloadable content, because then you're sacrificing your literal paycheck. But so the way that we replicate anything that has some degree of uncertainty, difficulty, ambiguity in terms of outcome, we use dice for. Dice allows in some way to engage in a kinetic movement that holds an element of anticipation, excitement, or disappointment. And when it comes to harvesting resources, that is not really the type of emotional experience that we look for in video games. It's not like combat where we're like, oh man, I really hope I win. I got to get it. We know that when we go up to the rock and we press the B button, you're going to start hammering it, and eventually it's going to give you some resources. Yes, there's a question of how much. Yes, there's a question of how good quality it is, but it is pretty reliable. And so if all it is an exchange of time, and we don't want it to be like all the other raw materials, what do we do here? Well, one thing that I have an idea for, and it was actually the Castles and Strongholds table on resource availability that got me thinking about this in terms of Forbidden Lands, is to do step dice. Okay, so you have that availability of resources, and it's saying, oh, well, you check how many is there, and if you roll an 11 to 24, it means that there are D6 trees here, or logs, I guess it were, and then you roll and you go, oh, cool, I got 5. But pretty much like that's it, right? Unless you want to put some governor, some limiting factor on that. My thought is roll for what the starting dice is, and then you roll on that, and any time you get over 2 on that die, you get one of the resources. Right? So 3, 1. So I got 1, and now I go down to a D4. And I roll this D4, and I roll it, and it doesn't matter what number comes up. It just has to be, that's 3, right? And so I got 1. And then I roll again, and I got 3. So I get another 1. And then I roll again. Well, I keep getting 3. What do you know with caltrops? Not even any roll. 3. And I roll again. And 1. So that's it. I got 4 pieces of wood. Now what this does is, rather than just having the old kerplunk, right, which is like, okay, I get D6 lumber. Cool. I keep getting really good rolls that are making my examples sort of bad, but you roll it and you go, all right, 4, I'm done. Having this step dice mechanic allows you to incorporate the tabletop gaming mechanic of dice roll, incorporating your modifiers that are appropriate, limiting the amount of math that is required, but at the same time, you're also getting to kind of go tink, tink, tink by having these repetitive rolls that don't feel absurd, right? Because if all I did was like, I'm going to go stand by this tree. All right, I got 1. Now I hit again, I got 1. All right, now I got 4. It turns it into a binary. Yes, I got something. No, I didn't. And I'm running out of time. Like there are only so many times I can do this before my axe breaks or until I get tired or until it's dark or whatever. So that's one thing. That's just an idea. And I think the second thing is that I'm implementing in the system that I'm creating is to abstract and de-abstract. And what I mean by this is we will still have this problem of accounting. We still have this problem of resource type. We still have this problem of managing, if I'm out on a quest, right? And I know that back at my stronghold, I really want to build a well. And so I need 10 stone, and let's say I need 3 wood, and I need 1 rope, and maybe I need 1 metal, let's say iron for whatever the thing that is around old buckets. So I know that I need these. And then as I'm going out on my quest, I get silk. Here's a resource that shows up in a lot of games. Fireflies. All right. I get oil. I get some sort of sand. I get tin. So in a video game, I would take these things as I'd be able to hold them, right? But in tabletop, I've got to put this stuff in my inventory in some way. And so if I do that, I'm going to pass up all of these. And because it is only a dice roll result, it's not located in the physical world, it's not represented as being located in a physical world in a video game, as soon as I walk away from these evaporate and will never be seen again. And so I have to constantly be walking away from these things. And then what happens later in the game when I'm trying to make a fish net? Oh man, if I had that silk, that would be great. I lost it. I don't know if I'll ever get it again. After all, there are 135 different resources in this game. Every time I've got to roll, maybe we can reduce the number of it by area, but it seems that in the face of this, Forbidden Lands made a smart move and reduced it to 3 resources, right? Wood, iron, and the third one. Why can't I think of this? Wood, iron. Anyways. No, I can't anyways. I got to look it up. Well, number 3 is only the resource I've been talking about this whole video. Stone. Wood, iron, and stone. But that is a bit limiting. So that does take some of the fun away from it, which I think in terms of sacrifices that need to be made, I think that's a reasonable one. But I think the system that I'm working on and that I'm stupidly just giving away in a video is... I'm just kidding. You can have any of these ideas. I don't care. But is when you pick up an object, it is abstracted into one of 7 categories. I'm arbitrarily selecting 7, but right now that seems to be the most sense. Okay, so one of them would be like vegetation. One of them would be like animal parts. One of them would be minerals. One of them would be like precious stones. One of them might be magic items, etc. And cloth. All right. And so when you pick up an item, you only pick up the abstracted form of it. So no matter what area you are in, you pick up an abstracted form of that item. By the time you go to sleep, and I'm not sure if it's like you yourself end your session or the player character sleeps. I haven't decided yet. You are responsible to de-abstract all of those. And the reasons for this, besides having like this enormous cognitive load of managing 135 different recipes and ingredients and knowing what you need and having all this stuff to carry, is that additionally, it does present this choice where you have to make like a this or that, either or choice, but it doesn't require you to do that while you are engaged in a far more interesting mode of gameplay. You are able to say, okay, I picked up one mineral. And then that night, you have to make some decisions. And maybe it'll be an easy decision. Maybe you'll say, well, I've been looking for wood. I want to build a ladder, and now I've got it. But if it's in terms of like materials you're not ready to use yet, or ones that you're slowly accruing or whatever, you're going to have to make hard decisions, but at least you're not going to have to make those hard decisions while you're trying to complete a quest. So it basically delays the decision point until later. So now this is the part where you comment below telling me what game already does this. And that's great. So we can all go play it. These are two, I would say, important pieces of this system. I can't say it's a system. It's not like an SRD. I'm making a survival game that focuses on this crafting, mostly as a challenge to myself, and also because I think this just needs to be explored more in solo games. I think there's something here that the level of specificity and what might be considered tedium in group play is really going to shine in solo play when you have the time to make these decisions. And honestly, especially early game, you're looking for things to make decisions about and to feel as if you're making forward progress. And so I'm curious about any of your ideas for this in solo play. And I would also say that it is a unique opportunity to be able to do something in a game that allows you to earn things that are not just straight up purchased. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is because when you purchase things, it's all pretty much laid out for you, especially if there isn't a system like there is in Maze Rats or something where you can design your own weapons. You know, one of the first things that I look at when I open up a game book is the equipment and stuff like that. And so just knowing the full extent of what is available in the core game, it only takes one time to read through that for you to know what that is and know the extent of it. With crafting involved, there's a big tree of possibility, like a decision tree of possibility. And it is very much going to incentivize my continued play because I want to find out the awesome stuff that I can make. And I want to get to that point where I am feeling really powerful in a game. I like that, right? I don't like feeling like I'm struggling forever. Now, Year Zero, I think, takes that a little too seriously. If any of you have played long enough and used Forbidden Lands, I'm sure when I get artifact dice, I'm just going to be mowing people down. But I think it's cool to feel that progress. I don't think it's I think there should always be a challenge, but there are some games that I feel like on day 30, I'm struggling along just like I was on day 1. When I buy those things, I feel less connected to them. I feel more connected to them when I find them or when I make them. Probably the most connected is when I like earn them from something that is both like represents a mechanical victory as well as a narrative victory. Really, what separates crafting from currency is that it's your stuff and your tools that you're making other stuff for yourself for. If we are to, suspend our disbelief enough to believe that I'm actually harvesting pebbles from a big boulder, then I can also keep that suspension of disbelief in effect when I am crafting something for myself, and I can still feel that lizard brain pride that I made something and it's mine. And to me, that's going to enhance the gameplay. It's going to enhance the immersion. But we want to do all this without taking away from the other pieces of the game that people really do show up for. And so the balance on that is, your mileage may vary, what you enjoy. But for me, I would like to see a little more crafting, a little less arts. You know what I mean. More crafting. I'm not saying I like art. I'm not good at arts and crafts. I hate glue. I hate having glue on my face. It's disgusting. I had a lot of issues with... sorry.